And welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I'm joined by Annie Spillman, Texas Lobbyist and representative for the Texas Business Association. Annie, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a real pleasure to speak with you. I always enjoy doing this, and it's going to be no different speaking with you. So, I gave maybe the briefest possible introduction that I could think of just then. Would you like to expand on that anymore?
Sure. Yeah. So, been a lobbyist for a while now, and it ages me when I say that I've been around the Texas Capitol for 25 years. I joke that I was house trained, meaning that I worked in the House for several state reps and in committee, which was great because you get to know the process really well. And I always, like to brag. Second generation, sixth generation Texan. I just almost messed up my great Texas pride. But as a lobbyist, I've worked for some great organizations, small business, the business community, which has led me to where I am today, representing the Texas Business Coalition.
Yeah. I am also a fifth or sixth generation Texan. What part of Texas do y'all hail from?
Well, you might be able to hear it in my accent, but I was born in Greenville, Texas, so East Texas, just outside of Dallas. But we moved around a lot. But yeah, we've got a lot of family from the Dallas area, and I think that the accent really comes out whenever I start talking about passionate issues.
Yeah.
So it might be real thick by the end of this.
Yeah, I've been to Greenville, Texas, a handful of times, surprisingly. So I know exactly.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it was fine.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's nice to get out of town every once in a while. So you were part of getting the Death Star bill passed. I think that people affectionately call it that by now. I know that some people use it as a pejorative, perhaps, but at this point, it's stuck, and I think it works. What was that like? Why was that important?
Man, I have to tell you. So in my previous role, I was running NFIB in Texas, National Federation of Independent Business, and saw those members of mine. You represent independently owned small business owners across the state of Texas. It was literally one of the most difficult jobs I've ever had, but also the most enjoyable and proud I've ever been representing those group of business owners. And so just sort of leading up to your question, I saw those business owners through natural disasters, through a pandemic, and through some successes. But, one of the things that it started growing and growing and growing that I would hear from my members is that their locality, their cities or counties, began to pass local ordinances. They were extremely burdensome, that conflicted with state or federal law. And so it was just this patchwork of regulation that small business owners were trying to comply with. And if you think about it, small business owners don't have in-house, attorneys or CPAs or any of that. And so many times they're trying to keep up with these regulations on their own, or a member of an association that's doing that as well for them. But, more and more and more, and I worked for NFIB for nearly a decade. And before that was representing some small business insurance agents specifically. But, I kept hearing, hey, Dallas is trying to pass this local ordinance, Austin, Houston. And one that really got us into this, I don't know if you'll recall, but in 2018, the city of Austin passed its own paid sick leave ordinance.
Yeah.
Right. So I put that in quotes because it was kind of like this sheath to do other things, which was it built into this ordinance. The city had put in that they would have complete subpoena power over employers' records and their employees' records, which is very dangerous. Why does the city of Austin, need to have subpoena power over this, proprietary information? But the ordinance was just out of control. It was requiring these small businesses to provide paid sick leave if an employee did 40 hours or more in a week. I mean, some people do that in 2 days.
Sure.
And so at any rate, it was, extremely burdensome. It didn't make sense. It's almost unconstitutional. So at that time, NFIB paired up with TPPF, Texas Public Policy Foundation, to sue the city of Austin on that ordinance. But we realized, hey, we can't go around. We don't have the money. We don't have the time. We don't have the resources to go suing every city for these ordinances that they're putting out there for small businesses to try to comply with. So that's when we formed a coalition of other, business minded business and industry folks to try to pass some legislation at the Texas legislature that would stop these cities from trying to pass any ordinance that went above and beyond state and federal law.
Yeah.
So therefore, it was then we deemed it the Texas Regulatory Consistency Act, which then the opponents, like you said, deemed it the Death Star, which we were totally happy with. Our bill author at the time, who's now Speaker of the House, Dustin Burrows, he wore that with pride because he said, you know what, if we're going to have this Death Star and it means that I'm sticking up for, constituents in the business community throughout Texas, then so be it. I have to tell you, you think something like that in Texas would be very easy to pass, and it was not. And I know we'll get into this later in our conversation, but unions in Texas have a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of organizing efforts. It took us 3 sessions plus a couple special sessions to get that passed.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud to say that while in my role at NFIB, we were able to pass the Texas Regulatory Consistency Act in a fair way. We worked with cities to do it, and it was really fair piece of legislation. But it made national news. It was all over the place. And I can tell you that I believe that there may be some legislators that are going to try to expand on that success from last session. So we'll see how that goes.
Very cool.
To be continued, right?
Yeah. So I think at the beginning, I think I said Texas Business Association. Is it the Texas Business Association or Coalition? Is it association?
Texas Business Coalition.
Coalition. Mm-hmm. Okay. My apologies on that. Texas Business.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So you're.
And, we're built of Texas business owners, and we work around issues that would support Texas business owners, the Texas economy, and of course, anything that would protect not just business owners, but their employees from, some kind of unfair practices that are happening in Texas, that being the state, cities, and counties collecting union dues that are completely used against the business community. So that's our main goal going into this session.
Yeah, so that's what the Texas Business Coalition is working on now. So, I mean, you say unions in Texas. I don't know. People keep telling me that there are no unions in Texas, and then I think about it. Well, I mean, there's the local police union, but they call themselves an association. But then there's a bunch of Starbucks that are their employees are unionizing, is what the news tells me. I don't know what's what. Are there unions in Texas?
Absolutely. There are plenty of unions in Texas. And then off the top of my head, I know, but I'll also want to make sure I'm not listing any. AFSCME, it's the American Association of kind of federal, state, and municipal workers, and they have their Texas branch.
Yeah.
And the AFSCME union is one of the largest arms of the AFL-CIO, which has been around forever. And the AFL-CIO has a large presence in Texas, and they use, these other unions, AFSCME, American Federation of Teachers, that's a union, the CWA, Communication Workers of America, Texas State Employees Union. That's just to name a few. But when people say there's no unions or hey, we're a right to work state, why do we care about unions? They don't really have any impact. That's completely false. And we've got a lot of, facts to back that up. I mean, you've got union presence, like I said, on the state and municipal levels in Texas. And sure, you're completely right. There are police and firefighter unions, but those serve in a totally different capacity. They are sort of like the unions of yesteryear and why unions were set up to begin with. Those unions are really out to work on collective bargaining agreements, to protect police and firefighters, to help them with their pensions. And they don't really get involved politically. The other unions that I mentioned, which are, part of these national labor unions like the AFL-CIO and the SCIU, their sole purpose now is for political activity, for get out the vote, and to push partisan politics. They're not set up, like I said, the unions that were set up sort of in the 1920s, which was, to make sure that the workers had safe places to work, that they were, being paid, they were being taken care of, because there weren't laws in place really at that time. Now we've seen, obviously, things have progressed. employers obviously take it upon themselves, whether there's a government mandate or not, to protect their workers, to make sure they're being paid, to make sure they have some benefits, some time off. And, that's the beauty of Texas. In the most part, we have a great free market sort of economic build in Texas where we allow employers to make responsible decisions without the heavy hand of the government.
Yep. Yeah. So there are unions in Texas, some of them that, okay. So why do people say there are not unions in Texas? Is there a law against unions? Is there some sort of regulation against unions? Can I start a union?
Well, you'd have to deal with the big bosses, up north, because they have a stronghold on the union staff, and they make a lot of money, and it's coming from their union members
Yeah.
that think they're just paying in for protections. But I think it's an education thing. We're a southern state, we're a red state. We have right to work laws. The which means you're not forced to join a union. And so I think it's just lack of knowledge. It's You would be shocked. I started working on the union dues issue back in 2015, worked on it again in 2017, and here we are in 2025. Legislators have no idea about the stronghold of unions in this state. Sometimes until they see what's going on during the election cycle
Yep.
and all the money that's being funneled into one party over the other. We do have a union issue. It's growing, and union membership continues to grow. And it's not the unions that people might think of where it's sort of like the private sector. In private sector, I mean, it's these unions that are formed to they're sort of collecting money on their own. It's private sector unions. What I'm talking about is the public sector unions, which
Yep.
really, like I said, are these political megalodon political machines being funded by our government, which
Yeah.
is where I know our conversation is going to go. But no, we do have an issue, and it's just purely about educating people.
So how do unions collect their dues? Is it you've touched on it a little bit. Go
Hmm.
into more detail about that. How is, I don't know, the Texas State Teachers Association or whatever, right?
Hmm.
How are those dues collected?
No, that's a great question. So back in the early 90s, it was codified into law that permissively gave our comptroller's office and down into, like I said, your municipalities, gave them explicit right to collect dues on behalf of labor unions and other associations from public employee paychecks. So how does that work? It's kind of shady, to be really honest. For instance, I'll give you the state comptroller example. So the comptroller's office, who they employ public employees. They also take care of all the public employees in the state, their payroll, everything else. So the state depends, the way this has been set up in law, the state depends on the union representative to hand them over paperwork that says, yes, they've checked the box because it's right to work state. You can't force anyone to be in a union or pay dues.
Yeah.
Uh, but the union can hand over paperwork to the comptroller's office and say, here's the new hire paperwork for, this public employee that has agreed for us to take this amount of money from their paycheck every single month. So there's no direct line from the employee to the comptroller's office. This is an example to say, yes, you may collect my dues. So we don't have, there's no way to kind of prove that there really has been authorization. So there's not really any transparency in the process. And, on top of the fact that it's just not the government's role to collect the dues, but we don't really know if there's been some sort of influence or something else from the labor union to say, hey, public employee, you're a new public employee. Here's your new hire paperwork. And also you need to check this box so that we can take dues from you and you're part of our union and we protect you. You need us. We'll lobby for you. We'll advocate for you. So it's not a transparent process. And it totally unlevels the playing field when we're bankrolling these unions by like I said, taking money from public employee paychecks and putting it right into the union coffers. And the state's doing that, and the
So,
counties are doing that, and the cities are doing that.
so in this example of the comptroller, I mean, I don't know, in the 90s, maybe it was harder to figure out how to get in contact with the comptroller, but now we have the internet. I could probably find the comptroller's phone number in a couple minutes. If I was a public sector employee, couldn't I just call the comptroller and say, hey, whatever, like I don't want to pay union dues anymore, so let's
Mhm.
just cancel that. Is that not something I could do?
No, not the way the statute's written. You have to go through your union organization, your union representative, and you have to opt out. You have to opt out. And from what I've been told from several employees, mostly the city employees, that it's sort of an act of God to opt out. They make sure that it's really hard to opt out. Like I said, the comptroller's office in this case is just sort of the facilitator. It's like almost like a bank. You told us we're checking the dues. It's automatic. We take it out. And if I want to say, hey, Mr. Comptroller, I don't want this money taken out, they'd say, go tell your union representative, because they're the ones that has to give us the paperwork that changes this authorization. So it's very shady. And like I said, there's no way for the comptroller to even know that the authorization was made, or if the union was fibbing about it and
Yeah.
just said, yep, they've checked the box, take the money out. And and I have to tell you, until an employee even notices that this money's coming out, I don't think they even realize where it's going, what it's for. For all we know, they're being told it's for something else.
Yeah.
It's for their liability protection. It's for whatever. But I had a friend who worked for the city of Austin for one of the council members, and she's a Democrat. She's a conservative Democrat, but she's a Democrat. And she's very smart and cognizant of her money and how it's being spent. So she went to the city and went to her, hiring representative, and she said, "What is this money that's coming out of my account every month?" Because she hadn't opted into anything.
Yeah.
And again, this is a Democrat, and so she's got no reason to
Sure.
lie to me about it. But she said, what is this money? And they said, oh, those are your union dues. And she said, no, they're not. I didn't authorize that. And they said, yes, you did. Wink, wink. And it's all about intimidation. And they say, well, everyone else has opted in, and to be a city employee, this is what we expect of you. She didn't take that very lightly, and so she made sure that they weren't taking money out of her account anymore. But there's not a lot of people like her, and she's strong, and she's not to be messed with. But she's a non-union Democrat, and she didn't agree with everything that the union was doing, and that's how hard it was for her to get out.
So I mean, I guess so in this example, and I'm sure there's plenty of other examples, but that's the one you use, so I'll just go with it. Works for a council member, whatever, chief of staff, communications director, it doesn't matter, whatever. Um, Unknowingly opted in to the union and goes talk to the union boss and says, "Hey, I want out," and the
Hmm.
union boss says, "Well, that's a bad idea for whatever reason." And she stuck with it. Does the union boss have any control over her job? Is there like, what's the intimidation factor outside of like, I don't know, lies and manipulation? It would be, I think, the council member that she worked for would be the one that would be able to fire her, right?
Hmm.
And I don't know if that would be wise, but still, does the union boss in some of these situations, how much power do they have over the employment of these employees?
I'm glad you brought that up. This is the very reason why we shouldn't be commingling, the government in this process being the dues collector. Because if you think about it, a lot of these government agencies, or state level, city level, county level, are elected officials. Where do they get their contributions from? In many cases, it's just such a conflict of interest. So yes, in this scenario, you know, call it the AFSCME representative, because they represent, city local. They may have given this council person, a large political contribution. They say, hey, Madam Councilwoman, your staff isn't complying with us. They're not on the right page.
Sure.
We don't like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the very scenario that makes it extremely, you know, I mean, it's common sense that we shouldn't have the government involved at all in collecting money for any sort of group, let alone a partisan group that's involved in political activity, that's involved in activities that advocate against our business community or whatever. Say they advocated for the business community. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's the improper role of the government to essentially be the de facto treasurer for these unions. It's just inappropriate. And really, in this day and age, why is it even happening? We've been doing this for over 30 years in Texas. And maybe at the time they did it because it was convenient to just have the money roll right out of their paychecks.
Yeah.
Guess what? Times have changed. The just like if I were a member of any other group like NFIB, like I was, we had to go and rally the troops and try to convince people to be a member of NFIB and tell them, what do we do for you?
Yeah.
And we had to check in with them annually to prove our worth. But once these dues, once that they have checked the box to say that they want to be a member, and I always do this because
Yeah.
again, we don't even know if they're truly authorizing that. But once they've checked the box, according to statute and also an attorney general's opinion from 2020, the duration of consent is forever.
Ooh.
They don't check back in. There's no annual, hey, do you want to continue to be a member? They've checked the box, and now they are perpetually having money taken out of their account until they're not an employee of the state, city, or county anymore. And that is not how we should ever operate in any scenario, private sector or public sector. Any group should come and prove their worth and say, here's what the union's done for you. Do you still want to be a member? And
Yeah.
I can tell you, hey, I'm one of those people too that I feel like I'm smart, educated, and I try to stay on top of things. But there's been times when I've had money coming out of my account or credit card or whatever, and I've been paying it for, a year or two, and I didn't even realize
Yeah.
that I still had this subscription or whatever.
Yeah.
So, it's just, it can get out of control, and it has. And I'll give you some numbers. I'll tell you, it's easier on the state level to get, a public request for information. Try doing that on the city and county level. And I keep forgetting to mention this is also happening with the ISDs. So we
Yeah.
mentioned the teachers unions in the beginning. The ISDs are also participating in this as public employees. But so we got a public information request from the comptroller's office, and I said, I need you to tell me how many public employees participate in having their dues deducted, and then what groups those go to, what unions, and how much the state has collected for these groups over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So I got that information back recently, and just in the last 10 years, not since the 90s when this started, but just in the last 10 years, the state alone has collected about $66 million for these groups. $66 million. And so if we were to look at what the counties, the ISDs especially, and the cities have collected, you can guarantee you can double, triple that number.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah,
it's a lot of money.
For sure. So yeah, I mean, it kind of seems, yeah, I could understand the argument. Okay, back in the 90s, there was a convenience factor for this, and it's still shady that they just sort of opt you in, and there's no real mechanism to know for sure if the employee wanted to do that or not. But nowadays, like you say, I can go on a multitude of websites and just click a button, and all of a sudden I'm paying a monthly due for Netflix or whatever it may be. It seems like it would be really easy to do that nowadays. And it also seems very, I don't know, paternal, like a paternal relationship. Like only we can do this for you, and like shame on you if you don't, if you don't want to support us. Like we're here for you, and if you're not a part of the team, part of the family, what are you doing? So why is it? So you're part of the Texas Business Coalition, and you guys are my understanding, are fighting against this at the legislature in the session. Why do Texas businesses care if the state is collecting dues for unions? Why is that? How does that affect Texas businesses, a small business or whatever?
Yeah,
Private.
no, and it's good to connect the dots in that regard, because you're thinking public sector unions, teachers unions, et cetera. Why does the business care? So first of all, generally with these unions, and I said at the top of the program that for instance, the American Federation of Teachers is one of the largest arms of the AFL-CIO,
Yeah.
and they're the largest labor union in the nation. And then, you've also got AFSCME, which is the large arm. So all this money that's being taken, whether they be this union or this industry or that industry, is generally pooled into like what I call the union GR, their general revenue fund.
Yeah.
And then it's filtered out of Texas. So it generally doesn't even stay in Texas. It goes up to the national unions, AFL-CIO or SEIU, the Services Employees International Union. So those are both labor organizations, and their main goal is to focus on the business community. And how do they do that? They work their ways through the Department of Labor. And so we don't know if in this administration they're going to have an open door or a key to the White House like they had before.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, when I was working for NFIB, it was during the Obama administration, literally the most visited person at the White House was the president of the SEIU. And they literally had a key to the White House. And so they worked their way through the Department of Labor. And why does that matter? Because the Department of Labor passed rules that would shut businesses down around this country.
Yeah.
They passed a persuader rule, which, again, trying to get information like we talked about earlier with the city of Austin, where businesses would have to report any correspondence, any communication with their attorneys, in regard to, pushing back on any sort of like union organization of their business,
Yeah.
et cetera. But it was really broad. And then other rules like the OSHA walk-around rule, which made a loophole in the rule. So OSHA, they make sure that your workplace is safe, and they do a couple of other things.
Sure.
But this rule would allow OSHA to bring a third party with them into the workplace. And these were union representatives. So they were literally opening the door. Our Department of Labor was saying, sure, union representative, now you're allowed onto any business, and you can unionize their employees. So that was something that the business community had to fight against in federal district court. We tried to get a stay on those rules.
Yeah.
There was another rule that came out called the joint employer rule that will allow class action lawsuits. You've got these franchisees. Well, each of the franchise location is owned independently by a business owner. Okay. Yeah. But they passed this joint employer rule that said, well, if I can sue the entire chain and not just individually. So it just cut out, a lot of work for the unions. So this is an example of, those were the type of rules that the business community would have to spend a whole bunch of money on to litigate against in the courts.
Yeah.
The other things that why does the business community care? The very thing that I talked about earlier with the, Texas Regulatory Consistency Act, aka the Death Star. The cities that were putting out these local ordinances that created major barriers for small businesses, especially, those all came from the policy suggestions from the pressure of the unions to these local elected officials. Hey, we want you to pass a paid sick leave ordinance. Hey, we want you to increase the wage here. And, those all sound like good things, but they also have a lot of caveats with them. Like, you can sue an employer, you can, do all these things. There's always little tidbits hidden behind these local regulations. So every single thing that these unions do is directly in the face of what small businesses or businesses in Texas are trying to do, and stand against the principles in Texas, and should be in any other state. But regardless of that, people are allowed to have differences of opinions and policies and political stances, but our government should not be in the process of facilitating their resources by collecting millions and millions and millions of dollars for them through public employee paychecks. So that's why we care. And you know what? They need to do their own work. If you think you're doing a good job for your members, then you should be confident enough to go directly to your member and say, hey, we think you should be a member of the Texas State Employees Union. We'd like to, you to pay $20 a month to be a part of our union. Do all that directly. Why do we still need a middleman? Why do we still need the government to, you know, take the money from their paychecks when they don't really even know what's going on? I
Yeah.
would question that. I would question that.
Sure. So I spoke with Ryan Walters. He's a superintendent of schools for Oklahoma last week, and about this very issue. And he said that they don't do this in Oklahoma. They don't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of makes me. I know that Texas does it. Makes me wonder: is Texas the norm, or is Oklahoma the norm, or I don't know? Is it a 50-50 split? What's going on nationally?
Right. So actually, many states, about 13 states at this point, and actually that number may have increased while we're talking because several states are working on also prohibiting their government from collecting public employee paychecks. But about 13 states have explicitly, in law, prohibited the state or local governments from collecting union dues
Yeah.
from public employee paychecks. Okay, keep in mind that some other states in our union have never even allowed it. So that I know 13 may seem like a small number when it comes to, the 50 states, but there's several states that have never allowed it,
Yeah.
so they don't need a law to prohibit it. And then some states they still allow it to happen, but sort of in kind of different connotation. I Texas, most of our neighbors have that have allowed this have already passed a law to prohibit it. We are definitely lagging behind. Oklahoma, I would say, is a leader in this way, but I would say it's not the norm, especially for a business friendly state like Texas to participate in this practice. And again, frankly, it's because this is done so behind the scenes that so many people don't even know that this is happening.
Yeah.
And frankly, if it weren't brought to my attention 10 years ago, I wouldn't know that it was
Sure.
going on. The general population doesn't even know what this is or why they should care. Um, but,
Sounds like a lot of the members of these unions don't even know.
oh, 100%. And again, an example, the teachers. When we first had this legislation back in 2015 and 2017, the union sort of paraded the teachers up there to testify against it because, you've got these sweet, teachers up there.
Teachers are a large voting bloc.
They're large voting bloc and they're active. But the union said they're trying to take away your ability to pay us because we provide liability insurance for you. And if you're not part of our union, then we can't protect you and you won't have liability insurance.
Yeah.
Which is completely false because they could just pay them directly and they still have their liability insurance.
Yeah.
So, they're misled. They think they have to be part of, they don't even know that they're part of a union. They just think they're paying for their liability insurance every month.
Sure.
So when they go check off that box in their new hire paperwork, they're checking it off to have their insurance, right? They're not checking it off because they want to be part of a union. And frankly, many of the things that the unions lobby for or against are, opposed to what a lot of these teachers are for or
Yeah.
against, one way or the other. They don't necessarily share the same standpoint on policy or politics, but they're using their money the way that they want to use it. And it's not for the principles of what the teachers necessarily stand for. I would say that in this day and time, specifically as we sit here today, when you have the federal government and state government, Texas now, I'm proud to say, has created, these Doge committees where they're really diving deep into waste, fraud, and abuse and, the things that the government needs to be streamlining, et cetera. It couldn't be a better time because this is like the prime example of something that the government shouldn't be doing and something that, frankly, they're keeping from the public, the general public.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is totally in line with what we're focusing on right now in this country is, making sure that our government is spending taxpayer money efficiently and ethically. And in this case, we are directly, going in the face of all of that. We're
Yeah,
conflicting with what we're trying to achieve
for
in the
sure.
country right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and y'all have been at it in one way or another for many sessions now, and it seems like this is a good time to strike. So that brings me to sort of wrapping up the conversation. I'm sure that bills have been filed this session to stop this, right? What do those bills
It,
do?
no, that's good. So, we're not being selfish. We're not going any further, but to say, if you look at the legislation, it literally points out where this is happening.
Yeah,
So, state level, like I keep saying, city, county, and then the ISDs.
yeah,
So we address each of those sections in the law by amending them or repealing them, uh, where it explicitly gives these agencies the authority to collect dues for the labor unions. So we just go in and we take that away. We're
yeah,
not trying to get into the business of anything else. We just say, hey, government, you need to stick to the proper role of government, and you're going to stop collecting the dues for the unions. And hey, unions or any other association, if you want to have a membership, you need to do that on your own.
yeah,
So that's the legislation just strikes right at the target. And I will tell you, going back to our previous conversation, the legislation does exempt our first responders so that they can still have their dues collected from their paycheck. And you may say, well, that's sort of hypocritical.
right.
Um, but I'll tell you why. Well, one, their union representatives are not involved in the way that these other labor unions are. They don't get involved in going after businesses, or the employer-employee relationship. They don't even deal with that. They deal with their police, fire, EMS folks, and their protections. The other reason is that your listeners need to know that in Texas, we don't allow for collective bargaining agreements but for that population of people, but for first responders.
Yeah,
So within those collective bargaining agreements, that's where they do all their negotiations and they talk about union dues. So they're always advised as to what's going on, the police and fire. But anyway, because of the collective bargaining agreements, we didn't want to touch that. We're exempting them. They can still carry forward with what they're doing. But anyway, we eliminate the sort of forcibility of our government to
yeah,
collect the dues for unions through that. And our bill author is Chairman Senator Tam Parker. He's sort of from the north, kind of around Dallas area, Flower Mound. And then we've got State Representative Carl Tepper from Lubbock that's carrying it for us in the House. And I can tell you that we expect to have several other legislators sign on to this legislation if it, merely just to be transparent about what the government's doing. It's common sense legislation. Take this off, take this off their table
yeah.
as far as what they're doing. But we really hope, especially with the Doge committee that's been formed in the House, that they'll consider this as well, just as part of that Doge bill that we're looking at in Texas.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to have some standalone legislation that'll address it directly.
Yeah, so I have to ask before we sign off. I mean, like you've illustrated, this has been an issue for a long time. People have been trying to end it for a long time. And yes, it does seem like this session is ripe for something like this to pass. And Senator Tan Parker and others being behind it, I think that's a good sign. I think
Mm-hmm.
you're not trying to eliminate these unions. They can still function as they function today. It's just the government isn't going to collect their dues for them, and that's it. In the past, I mean, that sounds very, you know, love it or hate it, doesn't really matter. Texas has been a Republican led state for a very long time, and that seems like something Republicans for a long time would have been. It seems like a no brainer, like a slam dunk. Like, sure, yeah, okay, that doesn't make sense. Let's do this. Why? What has been the pushback in the past? Is it just fear of losing their position because these unions have the voter block to make their primary scary or their general election scary, or is there something else?
It's a good question because you're right. It is a no-brainer. And I can tell you in the past, I don't think it was something that they didn't support. But the unions are smart. They put the right people forward to completely intimidate these legislators. Because, in the past, it did go to Republican led committees. It was Republican led House and Senate, as it's
Yeah.
been for quite some time now. Um, they put the teachers forward, and they were saying, I had, members saying, Annie, we can't vote on this. We can't be for this. The teachers, they've come out, they're all against it. And, I'm afraid and that we're going to piss them off. And, um, I think in where we are today with what's gone on with the teachers unions and, this ESA stuff and the school choice and everything, legislators are starting to become a little bit more privy to differentiate just teachers and teachers unions.
Yeah.
Okay, so the teachers unions have been what's been fighting back on the governor's priorities in the last several sessions. And so I think you see that these legislators, the light bulb's sort of gone off, and it's gone, oh wait, it's not the teachers that oppose this, it's the unions.
Yeah.
And then they also had groups, some of the first responder groups that, even though they were exempted in the past, as they are now, they were saying it was sort of like a brothers in arms fight. Like, they were working with the labor unions to put a card against, because the labor unions knew, especially in Texas, that if you have your, police groups or firefighter groups opposed to something like this, they're going to stick with them, even though they were exempted. We're trying to make sure that legislators know, and I think they do now, that they're exempted. We're being consistent with state code. We're not going to touch the first responders. So, and it's like you have some of these union groups that are kind of seeing the writing on the wall nationally and in Texas. So they've even themselves begun the auto pay direct. They have said, hey, it's the NEA, for example, the teachers union on the national level has said, hey, teachers, some of these groups are trying to take away your right to be a part of the union by canceling payroll deduction. So switch over to auto pay direct with us now.
Yeah.
So you even have their own group saying, pay us directly. It's convenient, it's easy, it's safe.
Yeah.
So now we're going to codify that.
Yeah. No, well, it seems, like I said, it seems like this is the year that it'll probably happen. So best of luck to you.
Yeah,
Annie,
cross some fingers.
Annie Spillman, representative for the Texas Business Coalition. Again, apologies for saying association at the beginning there. Is there a website or social media that you wanted to plug?
Yeah, just follow the Texas Business Coalition on Twitter, and you can it's the txbusinesscoalition.com. Follow us there, and if anyone's interested in getting involved, or you're a business owner, you can reach out directly to me at Annie@mainstreetrelations.com.
Okay.
Because the more we can get people involved in this, to reach out to their state senators, state reps, the governor's office, the better. Because legislators need to see that this is an important issue. We can't just leave it behind and focus on some of like the top emergency items. This would be a landmark piece of legislation if we get it passed. So we need everybody on deck. We need them involved.
Yeah. Well, Annie Spillman, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.